This meeting is being live streamed. Got it.
Hello and welcome to another Sundance Books and Music live stream. My name is Emily. I'm the assistant manager here, and I'll be your host for today's virtual reading. This afternoon, we are happy to welcome back our old friend Ben Rogers, who will be sharing from his new short story collection, The Mayfly, which will be available in the store soon. You can order your copy by giving us a call or stopping by. Ben Rogers is the author of the novels The Flamer and The Heaviside, and the short story collection, The Mayfly. His work has been published in The Rumpus, Pank, McSweeney's Internet Tendency, the Portland Review, Arroyo Literary Review, the Nevada Review, and Wags Review, and has earned the Nevada Arts Council Fellowship and the Sierra Arts Foundation grants. He is the lead author of Nanotechnology, Understanding Small Systems, the first ever comprehensive textbook on nanotechnology, and Nanotechnology, The Whole Story, both of which earned the Choice Outstanding Academic Title Award from the American Library Association. He studied engineering and journalism in college and has worked as a business analyst, a newspaper reporter, a teacher, and a scientist at various labs, including Oak Ridge National Laboratory and NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He is currently the director of engineering at Nevada Nano, a company he helped launch in 2004. He lives here in Reno with his family. Ladies and gentlemen, Ben Rogers.
Thank you. That's a very nice introduction. Thank you for welcoming me here. Always happy to be part of Sundance, and you guys are a warm, beautiful little thing in Reno that I'm so appreciative for. And you're always so nice to me. So thanks for having me.
Thank you.
I'm coming to you live from my kitchen via the way I work all day, every day now, which is online and talking to people through the computer. So I'm kind of used to this. In fact, my voice is kind of gone because I do this 8 hours a day now, talking to people this way. But I'm really looking forward to this one. So if you want me to kick off, or did you have anything else you wanted to say, Emily?
No, you can go ahead and please read some of your stories for us. That'd be great.
Cool. Well, thanks everybody for being here. I appreciate it. I wish we could all be in the same room together. I guess this enables us to do it with a little bit broader reach for people that aren't in Reno, or people could watch this later on, I guess. So I may be talking to you in the future. So hello, future people. So we're here to talk about my new short story collection called The Mayfly. I'm really happy about it. I'm really excited about it, to see it out in the world. I think it has a really pretty cover. This one has a not for resale band around it, but the actual book is a collection of short stories. It's a collection from about the last 10 years of writing, and it has 8 short stories in it, one of which is very long. It would go by the title of a novella, I guess. So about half the book, about the first 100 pages, are 7 short stories, 7 of which have been published in various journals over the last 10 years, and one of which has never been published, but I think definitely richly deserved to have been published. So I made sure that happened here. And then the last half of the book is something that I considered actually publishing on its own. I've spent the last about 4 years working on it, and it only amounts to about 120 pages. So that speaks to my output. But it's a novella. It's about 120 page short story called Man of Letters, that's set in Virginia City in 1867, and it's a series of letters. So what I thought I'd do, what I'd hoped you guys would be pleased by me doing, I'll walk through, sort of give a tour of the book, a little background on the different stories. I'm going to read from 3 of the stories just for a little bit. I always get bored when authors keep reading and reading, so I'll try and keep my reading short. You're welcome. I don't know if Emily's allowed to jump in, or if she starts seeing comments saying ask him this or whatever, but I'm happy to stop anytime in the next 20-30 minutes as I'm going through this.
Yeah, and I forgot to say, if anyone has any questions for Ben during the reading, leave them in the YouTube comments and we'll get to as many as we can. So please send in your questions and we'll be happy to get to them.
Cool. All right, so it's 8 short stories. The first one, it's like when you walk onto the stage, you got to sort of set the tone. So this one's called On the Rejuvenating Effects of Arch Theft. And I thought it sort of set the tone. I was like, this is the kind of music I play. So hope if you don't like it, then maybe this isn't the concert for you. It is a short story in the form of an academic journal article. For about the first 10 years of my career, I spent a lot of time writing academic journal articles, and I sort of came to appreciate the form. It's an art form, where there's an abstract where you summarize what was found, and a methods section and a results section and a conclusion section and some concise figures. And I always sort of loved that. And and at one point I said, what if I could try and make a short story or some sort of dramatic story, fiction, but fit it into the form of an academic journal article. So that's what I tried to do. So I thought I would read just the beginning of that. So it's called, again, On the Rejuvenating Effects of Arch Theft. And this is the abstract. The authors ditch a mechanical engineering conference to partake in tomfoolery. They have one hell of a time, inspiring them to sanction a new conference in order to partake again on an annual basis. The authors get old. One of them gets pancreatic cancer. The remaining authors become once again inspired, this time to illegally remove a monument from its foundation and transport it across state lines for reasons that may or may not become clear to the reader. Initial data, albeit anecdotal, suggests tomfoolery cannot cure pancreatic cancer, but can produce levels of joy unobtainable with more conventional treatments. Background. So I'll read about the first page or so of the background section. The first meeting of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, ASME, convened in New York in 1880. Exactly 1 century later, in 1980, the ASME Conference on Education was held in San Francisco, California. Among the professors in attendance were the authors of this study. These 5 gentlemen were already casually acquainted, having attended many such conferences together. Their camaraderie had increased as a function of time, owing at least in part to their mutual disdain for the ASME annual conference, a gathering characterized by the tameness of the attendees' neckties, the sameness of the conference rooms regardless of host city, and the sobriety of most everyone at the welcoming mixer. During a mid-morning break on the second day of the 1980 conference, the authors stepped outside to commiserate in private, i.e. outside the auditory radius of fellow nerds. Ambient conditions were 63 degrees Fahrenheit with 38% relative humidity and cloudy skies. The conversation included mockery of 1, the sexual proclivities of certain plenary lecturer, 2, the sordid past of the hotel bedding, 3, one another. The topic then shifted to the sanctioned evening activity, a bus trip to the newly built state-of-the-art HVAC control center on the campus of Stanford University. Various alternatives to this tour were proposed and debated. Due consideration was given to the fact that the dinner at the campus dining commons would be complimentary. Diversions abound in San Francisco for the best minds of one's generation. And here it quotes, or it references Ginsberg, 1956. Although the author of that study concludes, such minds are often left, quote, destroyed by madness, starving hysterical naked, dragging themselves through the Negro streets at dawn, looking for an angry fix, unquote. It was an option. The authors of this study, who shall be referred to here as Berkeley, Irvine, San Diego, Cambridge, and Eugene, were willing to consider other options and soon made a faithful observation of an incontrovertible fact. The distance from San Francisco to Reno is 218 miles. Further, a rental car averaging 75 miles an hour can cover this distance in under 3 hours. Prior studies of Reno focus on divorce. For example, see A. Miller, 1961, and Cowboys, Ibid. J. Cash, 1956, conducted a well-known experiment there in which a man was shot, merely so that his subsequent death could be observed. Of greater relevance in the present case is the city's proximity to the 1980 ASME annual conference, specifically the following relationship, equation number 1. 218 miles is greater than the separation needed to ensure 0 encounters with fellow ASME attendees. Also relevant in this case, Reno's deep-rooted association with the field of statistics. And here it has a footnote, and the footnote reads, I should just know it. Number one, the authors here disclose a more than casual interest in blackjack. A Pontiac Grand Am was rented in San Francisco at 11 a.m. on Friday, June 27th, 1980, and returned at 3:30 p.m. the following day. Because Reno does not equal Las Vegas, the code does not apply. What happens there is not required to stay there. What happened in Reno? Diego received a lap dance from a homeless woman, for which he grossly overtipped. Irvine snuck into the Circus trapeze between shows and described long arcs on a swing through the dark, high above the bustling midway, naked but for his black socks and yet totally undetected. Eugene ingested and regurgitated an awful cheeseburger plus accompanying basket of fries plus 750 milliliters of Old Crow, earning him the nickname Old Crow. Then ingested an unknown number of Mentos and Rolaids, also regurgitated. Berkeley forded the Truckee River while holding forth on the elegance of plate fin heat exchangers. Cambridge met an off-shift cocktail waitress at the Cub Calneva Sportsbook, with whom he later co-investigated the suspension limits of a parked Subaru Justy. In this initial assessment of the city, it was found that the equation balanced. Reno took the author's money, but gave back 28.5 of the most liberating hours of their careers. Our careers, we, the authors. So that's the beginning of on the rejuvenating effects of arch theft that sets up how these silly aging engineering professors decided to steal the Reno Arch. So I ended up spending a lot of time down by the Reno Arch and trying to decide how one might steal and transport said arch across state lines. So that was a fun story to write. And it was fun to sort of write in the language I have to use at work, and writing these academic things in a fiction-y way. And that story was plucked from the slush pile by a woman named Roxanne Gay, who's a wonderful writer, editor. She founded the magazine Pank and literally plucked it out of the slush pile and sent me a lovely email one day saying she loved the story and they wanted to put it in their print version and not their online version. And so that was exciting for me. I didn't know who she was at the time. I just remember it was such a cool name. And then 3 or 4 years later, she started showing up everywhere. So Roxanne Gay gave that story a life at Pank magazine. That's
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The next story, I won't read from it. It's called The Young Man and the Mountain. A story that I'm really happy about finally seeing the light of day, I guess. I submitted this to many places. It was also finally plucked out of the slush at a place called the Arroyo Literary Review, who later submitted it for the Pushcart Prize. And it's a story about a man who is a professional road bike cyclist. And I guess I wasn't going to tell a story, I realized. So this weekend, my wife is rereading this book because I did a lot of work at changing the stories before I got into this. So she reread this particular story, which involves a man climbing Geiger Grade and getting into some trouble on his bike ride. And I considered going for a ride on that same day, riding Geiger Grade. And I ended up going instead on a bike ride with a friend of mine on Peavine and fell off my bike on Saturday. And that's why I have a cast. I guess I should explain that. I fell off my bike on Saturday and hurt myself pretty bad. I broke my hand and I broke a couple ribs and collapsed my lung and got some stitches and some other bumps and bruises. I spent the night in the hospital on Saturday night because I did something similar to what the guy in my story did. But so that's why I have a cast on my arm, and that's why I got this sweet bracelet that says fall risk, which I have not taken off yet because it makes me laugh.
Well, we're all glad you're okay.
Yeah, thank you. I am too.
And mostly in one piece.
Yeah, I'm recovering. So that's the second story. The old man. It's called The Young Man in the Mountain, and it's called that because it follows the same form, or I was inspired by the novella The Old Man and the Sea. So it has a very has a similar trajectory somebody who sort of goes out and catches something bigger than they maybe are capable of handling, and then how people's art, or the thing that they sort of bring back to the beach from going out into the ocean and catching this amazing thing, can be misunderstood when it's brought back, which is what happens in The Old Man and the Sea. So that's what that story's about, but it's not very funny. So I didn't think I'd read from it very much. I prefer reading stuff that sort of like makes me giggle. So the next story in the collection is the Mayfly, Mayfly itself, which is the first story that I got published sort of outside of my little pond of Reno. And I got some stuff published when I was in college, at the college journal. But this was the first thing that was truly plucked out of the slush by somebody at a journal and said, we'd like to put that in our magazine. And it's just a totally wacky story. It's I'll read the beginning of it and you'll get the sense of what it's about. It's meant to be funny. And as I said in a letter I sent out to everybody earlier this week, that it's got the only line that I ever audibly laughed out loud while I was writing it. I was writing in my journal, and the thing I wrote was just so absolutely ridiculous that it made me laugh out loud. So I'll just read the beginning of Mayfly. Our Mayfly wriggles up through the silt of the river bottom and into the water above, savoring the fresh flavors in his gills. Hibernation has left him groggy. With a gentle hop, he joins the flowing murk and is carried downstream, glancing against pebbles slick and cool to the touch. He tunes into the murmurs and clicks of the river underworld. The muted colors could use some punching up, he feels, but no matter. Carpe diem. Our Mayfly is happy enough just to be alive. A Mayfly like any other, except for the oversized cartoon eyes and the recognizable voice of a mildly Jewish comic actor with broad demographic appeal. He falls in love right away. She is clinging to a reed. It sways in super slow-mo. Shall he compare her mouth to a mulcher? It art more omnivorous and more economical. He grows to love this mouth, the way it scrapes and sucks fish shit off rocks. But she plays hard to get. She gives him the silent treatment, the cold pronotum. He waxes anthropomorphic, praising her rock-hard abdomen, her no-nonsense charm. She stares, chewing, into the gloom. Often she just scuttles off. No nod of acknowledgement, no flip of the antenna. It is as if she doesn't know he exists. Worse, it is as if she doesn't know she exists. He names her Jennifer. After a particularly fruitless afternoon of wooing, he takes 3 of her claws. My wife's sort of laughing. He takes 3 of her claws and 3 of his, and more or less drags her across the riverbed to a sun-warmed shallow near the bank. This she seems to respond to. When she sinks her incisors into his mesotonum, it tickles a bit. Jennifer's a feisty one, and he's open to that. He runs his foreleg through her caudal filaments, and she curls into a fetal shrimp-like position, which at least makes her easier to transport. He rolls her to the water's edge and waits. When she uncurls from an O into a C, her view is of a yellow buttercup lit by a beam of sunlight with snowy globe domes in the backdrop. When the hatch happens, he begins, but her blank expression worries him. The hatch, he says, you know about that, right? No response. It's okay, he says. So when everybody starts sprouting wings, we'll have just a few hours to live and mate. And I guess what I'm asking is, will you do me the honor of, no response. He thinks perhaps he has offended her. Not right this minute, of course, he says. When the time comes, I've found the perfect place. The yellow chalice you see before you. Promise me, Jennifer, promise me you'll meet me there. Her mouth gapes. He considers this a positive sign. A yes, maybe, but it's something else. It's awe. Jennifer has never seen air. A figure swift and black glides overhead. It lands nearby and starts pecking in the muck. Jennifer, he cries. Jennifer curls up. Jennifer is plucked out of the water like a Cheerio. Jennifer is swallowed whole. Our Mayfly crawls under a rock, and there he remains for what would be 2 of our years, or about 10 days. The next night, a large female squeezes in next to him during a thunderstorm. She's a generous listener. He names her Diane. Diane doesn't seem to fault him for droning on and on about the time he bore witness to the murder and ingestion of his ex, still fresh in his mind. When next the sun brightens the water, she ventures out and he follows. Yapping away, he bumps into her as they navigate a narrow passage between two rocks. He apologizes. Diane doesn't budge. He scrambles up and over her body to find that it ends abruptly. The top third of her has been pulverized by a rogue twig. A week later, he is at Sheila's side when she quakes, convulses, and explodes after eating some bad decomposed organic matter. He reconsiders the practice of naming his love interests. So that it gets worse for the Mayfly from there. It's hard having a human consciousness inside of the insect's body that only lives for 24 hours and has to mate. So
I would describe that one as funny and existential.
Yeah, totally. And I like that. I think that story is very short and ridiculous, a little scientific, and it's sort of, for me, captured what is the crystallized thing that is this collection. And that's the idea that I sort of wrote on the back, that the life of a Mayfly can be harrowing or hilarious, but it is always short. And so too the short story. In order to sort of meet the qualifications for belonging in this book, it had to be either hilarious or harrowing, and it had to be short. And I had to like it.
Yeah. Real quick, Heather's asking if the Mayfly has a name, if he's given himself a name.
No, he doesn't. He's just called our Mayfly throughout the story. Good question. He does name his love interest for a while, though. Okay, so the next story is called The Caretaker. It's just a straightforward missionary short story. It was once called Cutting Curtis, and that's because it's about a sort of top of the line editor guy who's a LA type guy who takes time, goes up to Lake Tahoe to stay in this really nice house on the lake that's owned by a producer, so that he can do the editing on a reality show about a morbidly obese man named Curtis. So he arrives at Tahoe to stay in this beautiful house, and his job is to go into this dark room in the basement of the house and cut film and create this reality TV show, essentially. I will not be reading from that story. I will say that story I shared with Claire Watkins. We switched stories, I don't know, 10 years ago or something. I helped her on one story and she helped me on mine. So the story that I helped her with ended up in a collection that's like the most lauded collection of the last 20 years. So, and it's not because I helped her, and my story ended up in this little book called Mayfly, but I did appreciate her help on that particular story. All of these stories I have many folks to thank for helping improve them over the years. So I've come to realize that this is a collaborative effort. At some point, all of these stories are sort of a work of multiple people's help. All of them are named at the back of this book. I'm sure I missed a few people. Okay, I'm going to move on. The next story is called Hillbilly, and it is about a young boy who goes to tennis camp. And some of you know that I spent time going to a nice sort of preppy three-week long summer tennis camp in Carmel Valley, many of the summers of my youth. And so this story is based on that experience. And it actually, this is the story that I sort of consider the acorn that eventually grew into my novel, The Flamer. I wrote this story, and it's about this boy who goes to this very fancy tennis camp and ends up getting in big trouble with explosives and fireworks and stuff while he's there, which combines sort of a multiple of the stories of my own youth into one story. And The Flamer, he goes and does that, and then he comes back, and then sort of chapter 1 of The Flamer as published starts there. So I eventually at some point excised the story Hillbilly from the Flamer. So it's not in The Flamer, but I've always liked the story, and it's sort of the origin story of Obi, for those of you who've read The Flamer. And it stands on its own. You don't have to know The Flamer to read this story, because it'd be sort of the very beginning of it. So that's Hillbilly, that's in there. The next story is called The Unbridled Underestimation of Racehorses. And I don't know what are we doing on time? 5:25. So I probably won't read from this one much. Maybe I'll read a couple paragraphs. I think the editor who took this story said, as he read it, he was imagining Kevin from The Office. I don't know if you guys watch The Office, but he's sort of the fat and kind of stupid guy with like the perfectly shaved face, just a smooth, fat face. He's hilarious on that show. So Kevin from The Office is sort of who he imagines as the narrator of this story. So I'll just read like 3 paragraphs of it. The Unbridled Underestimation of Racehorses. I always wanted to be a racehorse. You probably won't understand. Maybe when you were in elementary school, you used to dream of being a cheetah, 70 miles an hour and all that. Only in bursts, my friend, only in bursts. I don't do bursts. I'm 290 pounds. Racehorses go the distance, 45 miles an hour for a mile, the whole time. Cheetah's sitting over there on the sidelines, unzipping his warm-ups, doing calisthenics in front of the crowd. Sure, sprinters get the shoe sponsorships, the photo ops. Racehorses, they only pose for photo finishes. That's because they have heart. When Secretariat died, they cut him open. He had the heart of a whale. Cheetah, they got spots. Oh, super. My penis is 20 inches long, lady. Well, not my penis per se. I'm not a racehorse. And maybe you're not a lady. So that's how that one starts. This is super awkward for me because my daughter, I don't think has ever heard some of these stories, is sitting here listening to me say them. So, and she's having trouble keeping her laughter to herself, but I appreciate that. So this is a growing experience for my eldest daughter, Sydney. Any questions on that story?
Not yet.
Okay, we'll cover them later. Okay, so the last 2 stories in there, this one's called Nuclear Winter. This one's never been published before, despite many efforts by myself to do so. That doesn't mean it's not a good story. And this is it's probably my first and only attempt at historical fiction. I've always been fascinated by the Manhattan Project. This large national scale effort to build the first atomic bomb, international really. So we brought in sort of the physics all-stars from around the world and tried to beat the Germans to getting what would be sort of a world-ending technology. But I always thought it was an interesting and just fraught with ethics and scientific and political issues. Just a fascinating story. So this story is sort of about the origin of the Manhattan Project. It was begun in a basement of a field in Chicago where they built the world's first nuclear reactor, showed that you could cause a nuclear chain reaction. And so the character in this story is a member of the crew, sort of one of the physicists working on that project under the famous Enrico Fermi, who won the Nobel Prize. And he works for Fermi. And so he has some underlying issues with Enrico Fermi, and those sort of bubble up to the surface during the story. So it's about the Manhattan Project, but it's also about jealousy. I think that's all I have to say about that story. And so the last one, and sort of the cornerstone of this whole thing, I'm very, very proud of this story, is called Man of Letters. And I think, as I described, it's letters being written by a young man who is an aspiring writer in the late 1860s. He's ventured up to Virginia City from San Francisco. And as I'll read the first letter, or at least part of the first letter, to sort of get a sense of it. And the letters are sent back and forth. You get to read the letters that he's sending to his best friend, whose name is Szilard, and the letters that he's sending to his girlfriend that he's left at home, whose name is Aurelia. I'll just read a little of the first letter he sends to Szilard. Are we okay on time, Emily? Okay.
Yeah, we're perfect.
Okay. So this is Man of Letters. Virginia City, Nevada, August 15th, 1867. Szilard. Arrived this forenoon, well battered by the coach. only to be battered further by Tanner. To those we encounter about town, he announces, "Here's my big brother, the professor." A 1-2 punchline. T is the taller. The menfolk pinch a brim or offer a handshake with palpable restraint of grip, as if I were a lady. None hazard a laugh, nor would I, were I in their boots. They know, as I do, and everyone else surely does in this city, that Tanner Stewart is not to be taken lightly. My little brother keeps a most sober countenance, and his big beard obscures all manner of smirk, and his eyes twinkle with rascality, malice, only a brother could discern. No, safest bet is to take the Stewart bros at face value. Assistant professor, I offer the dumbstruck, one lie piled upon another, as you well know. Remain a stranger to this town, as I was when I knew most everyone in it. Folks here still equate professorhood with similarly irreversible conditions, circumcision coming first to mind. No offense. So be it. Reputation precedes me, shall therefore proceed from it. To them I shall play the professor, while to you I shall continue in my role as the confessor. Assistant. Anyway, what would I call myself instead? The starving con artist? The writer of bad checks? Ought I take pains to clarify that, academically speaking, I do, in fact, assist a certain professor in the tutoring of his delectable daughter? Have yet to mention Aurelia to tea. She's a painting I'll keep in my attic, safe from his critical gaze. Thank you in advance for calling on her while I'm away. She so enjoys your company, tires quickly of her lady friends. They do not make her laugh until her sides ache, as you and I can, once we get going. Wonder, though, can you duo without me? My damn brother. I suppose I should make allowances. He's remained here, after all. Of course, this cannot be all too great a sacrifice, or he would have flown the coop like I did. Nothing's changed, Szilard. Still cannot do right by him. He'll bite off a plug of chew and, gnawing away, offer me some, only to step back in holy judgment if I decline. Or if I accept, he'll laugh at how much I bit off, or the way I bit it, or the volume or velocity of spit I produce. Were criticism spittle, I'd be T's trustiest spittoon. Yet, finding myself eye to eye with the bastard as I alighted the coach, I got the feeling these 6 some years had changed things betwixt us. The relentless elbowing for rank and attendant cruelties of our boyhood finally behind us. I offered out my hand. He took it, shook, only to twist my arm so as to read my palm, as it were. Seems he found what he sought, judging by the way he dropped my hand. He is most callous to those of us lacking calluses. You et? He asked. We broke bread in a new restaurant downtown. Water chalky, steak overpriced, bill obscene. T insisted on paying it, I'll grant him that. Had much to catch up on, but also very little, being brothers, etc. I filled him in on our various recent adventures. He slurped clam broth, and with it dripping from his beard, articulated disgust for the opportunists who've overrun our town, the striking celestial tunnel diggers, the general state of things. I see you're still full of piss, I said. And you of shit, he said. So that's the beginning of Man of Letters, where this man is arriving home and confronting his brother and going to see his very sick father, which is why he's come home. His father is dying. And he ends up getting involved in some highly nefarious things with his brother that lead to his difficulties in the latter part of the story. A lot of highway robbery and other things taking place as were common in Virginia City in those days. And I say in the acknowledgments, I spent a lot of time sort of steeping myself in the language and the goings on in Virginia City in that era. And I owe a huge debt of gratitude to the University of Nevada. I thank her in the acknowledgments. Grab it here. Donnie Curtis in Special Collections. She pointed me to this thing called the Alfred Doughton's Diaries, which are 2-foot high stack of hardbound books that were collected by one of my heroes, Walter Van Tilburg Clark. So I didn't even know he had done this. So the writer of the City of Trembling Leaves, which inspired me to become a writer in the first place, was authored by this man, Walter Van Tilburg Clark. And he ended up spending about a decade of his life transcribing the journals of this man named Alfred Doughton into these bound volumes that you can go read, which are just amazing pictures of the West during that era. And so I just absolutely devoured a lot of those. I would just get up every morning and read his journals for a couple hours and just grab little snippets of dialogue or snatches of things that they were talking about. And some of that, 4% of this story includes things that were sort of pulled from that work. So anyway, that's some background on that story.
Yeah, that sounds like some thorough research. It actually goes along with a question I wanted to ask. So a lot of these stories, you're learning Reno history a little bit. You're learning some biological things about mayflies. Do you find yourself getting inspiration when you're already reading about these things, or are they things that you're already interested in, or do you get the story idea and then do the research?
I think it's usually the second of those. The idea to put sort of a human Disney kind of character's voice in this horrible mayfly's life. And then I go start reading into like how their life cycle actually works. And that definitely opens up new possibilities. But I don't think you have to be curious about it. But it only takes like one little piece of curiosity or just that tiny little spark of an idea. And then you're off on this journey, and then it really opens up everywhere. But you have to have that initial spark. Like I would never have found all the Alfred Doughton stuff anyway. So I think the research informs the work. I think it's called smelling of the lamp when you're writing smells too much of the research, because it's very easy to get super involved and put too much of that into the story, and it's not serving the story. So it's a hard line to walk, to try and infuse your stuff with as much realism and sort of accuracy and that the research without making it a story about the research,
Right. That it being just like a report of what you've found.
Yeah, you learn all these cool things. You want everybody to hear them too, and they just want to hear a cool story.
Right.
Sounds true. So.
Yeah. And I didn't know that there had been so many iterations of the Reno Arch. I knew the one that is now, I guess, on Lake Street, is it?
Yeah.
And I knew the one that's on Virginia, but I didn't realize that it's gone through so many iterations.
Yeah, I didn't. I don't think I appreciated that either when I wrote that story. When I did a bunch of research about the arch, exactly, and that's when I learned.
Yeah.
About its many incarnations.
Yeah, very cool. So we do have a few audience questions here. We have a comment that says, "Hi Ben, it's Colette Torch. How did you come up with the idea of short stories, and how are they connected? Who or what was your inspiration? Sorry about your fall. Get better soon."
Hi Colette, thanks for joining us. It's so nice of you. The first question was why short stories. I think I think because they're short. I can write one in 6 months instead of 3 or 4 years. They're a little bit less of a commitment, I guess. Not that I'm a commitment phobe, but and sometimes just the story lends itself to that form, and you don't want to go quite as far with it. So it's a way to take a big risk without having to invest the next multiple years of your life into something. So I like that. And I love reading short stories. I love how much diversity you can get from one author, just jumping through a good collection. You can finish one and be like, I don't know if I really like that story. And then you read the next one, you're like, that's one of my favorite short stories I've ever read. And then you can get all that from the same person. That's fun. And just when you're reading a novel, you don't really like it. When you get to chapter 14, you're like, chapter 15 is probably going to be kind of like chapter 14, but a short story collection is nothing like that, at least the kind I like.
Would you say there's any kind of connection between these short stories at all, or is the connection just they're all written by Ben Rogers?
Yeah, no, there is. I knew that question was going to come, and it's a very valid question. And maybe there's something to be said for the stuff that I decided not to put in here, because when I first sort of put this collection together in my head, it had a couple other stories in it. I kicked them out. I think I kicked them out because they weren't funny or good, even if they'd been published. And that's obviously totally my personal opinion. So, and they also sort of had to there's something maybe uniquely Ben Rogersy about stuff that has a little bit of a scientific engineering bent to it, and also tries to be kind of funny, and also kind of is language driven. Maybe I'm sort of discovered who I am as a writer a little bit by saying what goes into this book, and what isn't exactly a Ben Rogers story, or at least doesn't belong in this particular collection, for what that's worth.
Okay. And then she also asked, who or what was your inspiration?
I think just other short story writers, maybe. Chris Coe comes to mind. People who write amazing short stories. I have friends and colleagues who write amazing short stories. Gabriel Urza, Curtis Vickers, the guys that sit down and go through these stories with me when they first come out, or help me write stuff. And then just reading other authors who write short stories. Anthony Doerr was an inspiration early on for me, at least. Hemingway was an early inspiration, but I've since discovered a lot of other amazing short story writers that I love. And I'd say like out of every dozen books, I'll have one short story collection, because I just keep going back to that form because I enjoy reading it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. We also have a question from Heather. She said, this book seems like a real study of the short story and of science as a storytelling vehicle, maybe. If there's time, can you talk about that and how science and story interact in your writing?
Yeah. What I'd rather do, and what I'm going to do, because I don't know what else to talk about, is the opposite of that, which is I've been trying to figure out how story and sort of the way my mind works at my job, my engineering job, on a daily basis. And I've found that storytelling has been the common theme. That's such a powerful thing to do. My sister-in-law sort of is a professional storyteller and helps people sort of tell their stories. And it just struck me that is the telling of a story is an incredible tool for both engineering and for entertainment. And by that I mean, when I have to tell a story at work, I have to, for example, explain some physical phenomenon, or the way a particular piece of technology is behaving or not behaving, or sort of pose a hypothesis and tell a story to myself that holds water. Like, this is the beginning, this is how it starts, and this is how it ends, and I think this is how it got between those two places. And you have to be able to tell a story. And if you can't sort of explain what's happening to a kindergartner, then you probably don't understand it. So you need to sort of storyify things, or you don't really understand how they work. How does an electromagnetic wave come out of an atom? When you have to tell somebody how that works, you kind of have to start at the beginning and then explain how it happens. And if you don't have a very good story, you probably don't really understand how it works. And that's a case where nobody on this earth has a very good explanation for how that particular thing happens. But the short answer is storytelling seems to be something I put a lot of stock in, both the fiction that I do sort of in off hours, and then what I do at work.
I don't know if this kind of goes along with that, but something I was wondering was, so you said you spend a lot of time down by the old arch, looking at it, figuring out, do you think the way that you describe and outline in the book, do you think it would work in real life?
I totally do. I
steal the arch or get it somewhere?
I think that if you followed the methods in that first short story, you could actually get away with stealing that arch. Yeah.
But you shouldn't.
You totally should. Well, you read the story. They actually encourage you should.
So do you have either a favorite story in the collection out of all of them, or are there any of these stories that you would maybe someday develop into a full novel?
That's a good question. The Hillbilly, I did do just that. I made the flamer out of it. Mm-hmm. I was never sure how long Man of Letters was going to be. I think when I got about 3/4 of the way through it, I said, I think this thing's about 120 pages. It's not quite a novel. So that one's about as fleshed out as I think it's ever going to be. The others, I don't think so. I don't think I'm going to go back and revisit them. Mm-hmm. And if I had to pick a favorite, it might be Mayfly, because it's just so kooky, and that's why I put it on the cover. This Mayfly that my cover designer so beautifully drew, and I had him really crank up the googly eyes. A Mayfly does not have eyes of that scale compared to its body, but he just makes me laugh looking at him. And So that might be my favorite, I think, in the collection.
Yeah.
Other than Man of Letters, which is the one I've spent so much recently working on. So that one I think is my favorite.
Mhm.
Just because I've spent so much time in the last 5 years with that
Mhm.
character.
Yeah, I'd like to spend more time with the Mayfly. He has a very, very sweet voice and outlook, but I think due to their biology, that's kind of not how it works.
It's just such an incredible. I love watching nature shows. I'm always just blown away by the stuff that like animals suffer. And I was hopped up on painkillers lying in bed this weekend, and my little dog broke both of his front legs earlier this year.
Oh.
I guess he was treated basically like a human, but I was just thinking of animals in the wild that suffer an injury, or go out on a hunt and break their ribs, and they just have to sort of take that or die, and they just have to sit there in that pain for days and days at a time. It's just, the animal kingdom is so brutal and ruthless, and so much. It's just so much to admire in animals compared to the way we can sort of doctor ourselves.
Right. Yeah. So, so you've published a coming of age novel. You've published your thriller last year, your thriller type book, and now you have your short stories. So are you thinking of maybe going into a new genre next, like a sci-fi or a romance or something like that?
It's a good question. My wife,
I guess Mayfly is a little bit of a romance in a way.
Yeah, it is. I don't know. I've got a novel I've been picking at for like 10 years now, and I keep working on it. And it's kind of, Chris Koch described it as a quiet book, which is fine with me, but it's a book about a family that falls apart. And it also is very much about metal detecting and barrel racing and collegiate swimming. So there's a variety of things that it's about as well. But and I'm still working on it. I think that'll probably be the next thing I try and finish. I've been working on it for a long time. But after that, I don't know. It's often interesting when somebody like Willie Nelson goes and tries to make a reggae album or something. When you get that like cross-pollination, when a particular something goes and tries to make their version of a Western or their version of a sci-fi, I think that it sometimes leads to really interesting results. A lot of times when you hear people talk about their album or their book or whatever, they're like, that was me trying to write XYZ book, and this is what came out of that. Mm-hmm. So that's often like the best way to be inspired by something, and the reader maybe never even knows that that's what it was. That I was trying to write Gone with the Wind, and this is what came out. It hasn't, you probably don't even see Gone with the Wind in it, but that was actually me trying to write Gone with the Wind or something very like it. So maybe I will, try and write Dune or something. And nobody will recognize it for that, but that will be totally ingrained in me.
Well, now's the time to do it.
Yeah.
Going to.
Well, the iron is hot. The Dune iron is hot right now.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for people who either are currently writing or would like to write, especially if they have a separate day job and a family and other things in their life?
I mean, if you love doing this enough, you will do it. And it kind of sucks. I mean, I get up and write for sometimes 15 minutes, sometimes an hour in the morning, not every morning. Mm-hmm. And that makes the time constant of my production pretty long. But somebody asked me the other day, how do I squeeze end time for this? I think everybody has the same amount of time. It's just, and I did the math. I said, well, if you do 30 minutes a day on something, that adds up to an equivalent of a work month every year. So if you just got up every morning and wrote for 30 minutes, you've got a month of work month every year in that. And so you can write a novel in your mornings if you are willing to take your time doing it. That's the only way I've known how to do it. I've wondered what it would be like if I could write full time, and I think I would sort of collapse under the expectation of that, or especially if I had to support my family on stories about mayflies getting raped by their colleagues. I don't think it would work. It's almost impossible nowadays. So almost every writer has a day job except for a very select few.
Yeah. So Do you have any short story collections or like favorite short stories? I know you recommended, or earlier you were talking about Chris Koch and Curtis Vickers and Gabriel Urza. Are there any other collections that have influenced you or that you would recommend to people who read your book and want more short stories?
Sure. My favorite short story, I think, is one that I heard about from Chris Koch, which is a story by Tobias Wolff, who's definitely a master of the form. Mm-hmm. Go read Tobias Wolff. But he wrote a story called Bullet in the Brain, which is a very short story, and the half of the story takes place in the time it takes a bullet to pass from a guy's front of his brain to the back of his brain. He's sort of flashing back on his life, and it's just an absolutely beautiful story. Other short story writers that I would recommend? No, I think if you just want to get into reading short stories, maybe something modern or recently published might sort of spark your fancy more than going back and reading some old Russians who are masters in this, or reading Chekhov or something. So read a short story out of the New Yorker or something that's considered some of the best short fiction being published today, and see if it sparks your fancy, and then go find that author and read more of their stuff. I don't know. That's an idea.
Yeah, great. And then something I always like to ask people, sorry, I was just looking at have you read anything good recently? Just like anything?
Yeah, I have. I read Thomas McGuane's Driving on the Rim, and I was blown away. He's a writer who's been around for a long time, and everybody will probably laugh. I'd never read him or heard of him, but I think, anyway, my friend Joe had read one of his short story collections and said, you ought to check him out. So I just grabbed this one particular book while I was on vacation, and just was knocked over sideways by how good the writing was and how just human it was. And this guy's been writing for a long time. He's definitely a pro, so I'm going to read more of his stuff. So I was really impressed by that book. I loved it. There was a time where I was traveling for work, every other month or so, and I got into this habit where I always had one nonfiction book and one fiction book that I would read. And as I flew back and forth across the country, somehow I could read fiction for a couple hours, and I'd just be kind of exhausted of reading. And I'd be like, oh, well, I'd be interested in switching to that nonfiction book. And I somehow had a fresh source of fuel for reading that other thing, so I could go back and forth. So since then, I've tried to always sort of keep one fiction, one nonfiction going. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right now I'm reading something, a local writer. It's great. I have it right here. Travis Bow. He wrote I guess it's a fantasy novel. He needs me to write a blurb for it. So I'm reading an advanced copy of it, and it's fantastic. And he's another guy, just a Reno guy who gets up every morning and writes, amongst the many other things. He's also an engineer, so it can be done.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think we're just about wrapped up here. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your writing with us. And we hope that everyone will come in and get their copy of Mayfly. Should be here any day now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Buy it at Sundance if you can. If you can't, buy it wherever you can. But if you can't buy it at Sundance, they're the best. And whoever showed up, I can't see who was here, but I hope there was at least one person hearing that you enjoyed it. I enjoyed talking about my work for an hour. And Emily, you're always wonderful to chat with. So thank you for having me and sort of hosting this forum for discussion of books and writing.
Yeah, thank you. We love having you. And hopefully next time for your sci-fi barrel racing, metal detecting novel, we can have you in the store.
That would be awesome. That would be a new world at that point. Let's plan on that.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, and best wishes for your speedy recovery.
Yeah, thank you.
And congratulations on the new book.
Thank you very much, Emily.
Yeah. All right.
Everybody,
Bye.
Thanks for coming.